Over the past few years, GTA San Andreas any% speedrunning has seldom been dormant for more than a few months. I'm not even taking into account world records or sub 4 hour times when I make that statement. New strategies, routes, optimizations, and skips have been implemented on a semi-regular basis. At this very moment, however, a significant change is being considered by the moderation team, and more importantly the community, regarding a quality of life rule change. On January 26, 2022, longtime speedrunner and community member Thriving sparked a discussion in the San Andreas speedrunning Discord channel when he referred to the current any% route as, and I quote, unplayable. Thriving goes on to imply that grinding the speedrun involves a tremendous amount of resets within the first 10 minutes if a runner wishes to compete at the highest level. It would be a mistake to think that Thriving doesn't have a leg to stand on here. With his many hours streaming world record attempts, his credibility is undoubtedly at the highest degree when talking about the current any% route. I have played this category a lot, over the past years especially. I would even use the word grinding to describe my own amount of time spent. But Thriving's hours compared to mine, that's like comparing a full shot glass with a single drop of water. Not only that, but Thriving is admittedly much more skilled at San Andreas speedruns than I am, meaning standards will be higher, leading to more resets. But this is normal and even expected for top level speedrunners in any game. This is not what's causing Thriving's anguish. So what is? In March of 2021, Thriving set a world record with new strategies that included a new mission skipping technique. This technique relies on a frame perfect input. Today, the route has evolved to use this frame perfect trick a total of 11 independent times for the perfect run. This alone is enough to make some people lose motivation to grind runs. Even worse, unlike speedruns of most other games that have frame perfect tricks, this one also includes pure, unadulterated luck. If you know all about duping and the on-mission variable, please feel free to skip to the timestamp listed. There's no reason to waste your time here. However, for those of you who don't know, duping in itself is nothing new. This topic is covered all the time, but here's a quick and dirty explanation that will fit the purposes of laying the background information here. When starting a mission in San Andreas, the game checks to see how many missions you have already completed to determine what mission to start. I'll call this the amount of mission points. Completing each mission is worth 1 point. So if a player completes missions 1, 2, and 3, this would give them 3 mission points. Next time they try to start a mission, the game will check, see that they have 3 mission points, and start the 4th mission. Duping, short for duplicating, is, simply put, starting the same mission twice so that it can be completed twice at the same time. The effect is that completing the mission will give the player 2 mission points instead of 1. So when you dupe mission 3, tagging up turf, instead of ending the mission with 3 mission points and starting mission 4, you'll end the mission with 4 mission points and start mission 5. I really wish we had an analogy as good as Darbian's frame rule bus stop thing. Duping requires the player to be able to manipulate the on-mission variable, which can be either equal to 1 or 0. Under normal circumstances, if a mission is running, the variable will be set to 1, meaning that a new mission cannot be started. So the goal is to start a mission, and then trick the game into setting your on-mission flag back to 0, so you can start the mission again. You got all that? The problem with this is that only a few setups were ever known to manipulate the on-mission flag. These setups were not accessible until about halfway through the game in San Fierro, or possibly at the very end of Badlands, depending on the route. This changed when On Mission 0 Vigilante setup was found and normalized. OMAV for short. As stated earlier, OMAV is a frame-perfect trick in San Andreas, and is currently the only way to perform dupes in Los Santos. The goal is to hold down the key that starts the submission Vigilante, get off of the police bike, and release it on the very first frame that CJ is considered to be on foot, so that a phone call can come in. By doing this and getting back on the bike and starting Vigilante quickly, Vigilante will start with the on-mission value being 0. But what about the pure luck I mentioned? Well, even if inputs are performed perfectly, there's a real chance that the phone call will just not come in, making the OMAV attempt a failure. Phone calls are checked on cycles in San Andreas. Los Santos call check cycles run every 90 milliseconds. Being that San Andreas runs at 30 FPS, each frame only lasts about 33.3 milliseconds. This equates to about a 1 in 3 chance of the call check cycle occurring during the frame that this trick is performed. Now I'm going to throw you a bit of a curveball here. In reality, San Andreas does not technically run at 30 FPS with the frame limiter on. It actually runs at 25 frames per second with 5 repeated frames. So what if the correct frame is repeated, or the frame before, maybe even the frame after? How does this affect whether or not the trick will work? I'm not an expert when it comes to reading or understanding code. All I can say is that from personal experience when grinding this trick, my success rate definitely felt much better than 1 in 3 when inputs were done correctly. I remember when OMOV was still quite new, I felt so strongly about this perception of better luck than what should be expected that I reached out to other active runners at the time and asked them if they felt the same way. I remember multiple people agreeing with me that it seemed a lot higher than 1 in 3. Another important thing to mention when talking about the luck factor being misconstrued is multiple check cycles when attempting the trick. In San Fierro, it's possible through luck to still have a phone call from Badlands, which is on a completely different cycle, in addition to the San Fierro calls you are expected to have at this point in the run. This means that instead of having only a chance for your 33 millisecond frame to intersect the 150 millisecond San Fierro cycle check, which is a 1 in 5, you also have a chance to intersect the 120 millisecond Badlands check, which is about a 1 in 4 chance. None of this is to discredit that luck is a factor with On Mission Zero Vigilante. It absolutely is, make no mistake about it, Jack. I just think it's important to be accurate and to not speak of certainties when they aren't certain at all, or in some cases just flat out wrong. This background information should suffice, and hopefully now you have some understanding of why Thriving called the game unplayable and wanted to at least discuss what he considers a fixable problem. Over the rest of this video, I will be talking about the proposed changes and present arguments for and against both sides. My goal is to be factual about this, but I'd be lying if I said I'm impartial and unbiased. So to avoid the perception that I'm stating my beliefs as fact, if I'm ever giving my personal opinion, I will put this picture of an onion in the bottom right of the screen. That all being said, what are the proposed changes exactly? At this point we have established that the call check cycles are the reason that luck is involved. The call check cycle instructions are found in the main.scm file and are very easily editable actually. All that would need to happen to remove the luck aspect would be to make it so that the cycles happen more often than 33 milliseconds. In other words, making the game check on every single frame if a phone call is available. With this modified SCM suggestion, if the frame perfect trick is executed correctly, it will work. This accomplishes completely removing what seems to be an arbitrary luck element so that human inputs are the only thing determining a runner's success with the trick. There really isn't much else to say about it. I've seen some concerns with this proposal. Some people jump to a conclusion that changing these values in game files has a potential to break something else. This is simply not the case. There's no reason or evidence that changing these values will affect anything other than how often the game checks for a phone call. Stability is always a problem with San Andreas, so I can understand the concern, but it seems extremely unlikely that this would ever be a problem. Another argument I've seen is that modifying game files to make anything gameplay related easier is just generally dirty. It ruins the integrity of the game. This is a fair stance to take, I think. The other reason this is generally rejected is that this can lead to a slippery slope. If we allow changes to the game files, people will be constantly asking for other modifications to be allowed as well. I've always thought the whole slippery slope thing is just kind of a dumb take. Yeah, maybe people will ask for modifications, citing this rule change as a reason to defend their cases. Guess what? Moderators can still just say no. We've already seen time and time again precedents being taken into account, but not being a decision maker when it comes to rule changes. Every different situation is just that, different. The other proposed solution is to allow players to toggle the game's max frame rate at will during the run using a hotkey for an external program. Players could press their hotkey to drop their frame rate, do the OMOV setup consistently, then press a hotkey that brings their frame rate back to the normal level. This is actually a sound solution to the problem. If the game's frame rate is dropped to 10 FPS, for example, we would expect each frame to last 100 milliseconds. This means that in theory, there's no reason that the 90 millisecond check cycle would ever not fall into every single frame. Assuming there's no stability issues, this could work at 4 FPS so that each frame lasts 250 milliseconds, which is actually longer than any relevant call check cycle. Using an external program to limit the frame rate to make San Andreas speedrun tricks more consistent is not really a new discussion, but the context definitely is different. Duping the mission explosive situation is known to be a risky and inconsistent strategy. When the necessary dump truck spawns in twice, there are actually two outcomes that can be achieved. The dump trucks occupy the same physical space, collide with each other over and over, and eventually explode, failing the mission. One truck is displaced or ejected from the other truck, leaving both relatively unharmed and allowing the mission to be completed. Other than some strange discrepancies with different operating system builds and hardware, the only known real way to influence the success rate was by using external frame rate controllers. Speedrunners at the time did some extensive experimenting with dropping the frame rate before the truck spawned in. Despite this, I don't really recall any public statement from the moderators, and I don't really recall players actually caring either. I feel like at the time most players sort of shrugged this off, maybe even felt that using an external program like that to limit the frame rate seemed kind of greasy, even though it might not be concretely against the rules. A more recent and more applicable example of this discussion comes from as recent as March of 2021. Malsakovsky submitted a run in which he used an external program to limit the frame rate of the game to make On Mission Zero Vigilante more consistent. Essentially, this is exactly what's being proposed now. In the days leading up to this, Malsakovsky announced that he would unveil his recording on Twitch with live post-commentary. As soon as he showed the first On Mission Zero Vigilante setup, a huge majority of people just scoffed, had a little laugh, and left the stream. The general consensus was that this was obviously not a legitimate run and would not make it to the leaderboards. But did the run actually break any rules? For some reason, moderators decided to completely dodge any real confrontation and refrain from making any sort of statement. Malsakovsky submitted the run with a link to the scheduled YouTube premiere. A moderator rejected it on the grounds of technically having no video evidence, since the video was not watchable. Then when the video was live, Malsakovsky went ahead and submitted this again. You would assume that now there would be some sort of actual reason for rejection, being that there's a video, but instead it was considered a duplicate submission. Fundamentally, this doesn't make any sense at all. The first submission had arguably no video, and the second submission absolutely had a video, so it can't even be considered a duplicate submission. Also, there's no reason to reject the first submission in the first place. To be transparent, I'm grabbing this next piece of info from memory, so it might not be totally accurate, but if I recall, the submission was made less than 12 hours before the video was scheduled to go live. There's no reason to not just leave the submission in the pending status. It's completely normal for submissions to sit in the pending status for multiple days, let alone 12 hours. After the run was rejected, I asked in the mod chat if we would consider adding in a concrete rule that says modifying the frame rate with external sources was not allowed. I was met with the response that this falls under all modifications besides the ones approved are banned. Clearly at the time, this was not a sufficient response, considering there was a large support for Malsakovsky's run to be verified with the idea that it did not break any rules. Why were the moderators so trepidatious about changing the rules when it seems applicable? Especially when in their minds they wouldn't even be changing any rules, only making them easier to interpret consistently. This is all just to lay down the fact that there is precedence when it comes to the topic of externally controlling the frame rate of the game. Precedence is not everything though, context is crucial. Sure, you can draw parallels between the explosive situation dupe frame rate tech and the OMOV frame rate tech. They're both using the same external method to achieve consistency, where consistency cannot be achieved using in-game methods. And as far as Malsakovsky's run, it's basically an example of the rule change being proposed in this instance. It's important to remember that On Mission Zero Vigilante was still pretty new and the route was not even close to what it is today. After another 10 months of grinding attempts since then, and really realizing how reset heavy the game is, some people's opinions will have changed. Opinions changing due to new information is not only something that does happen, it should happen. This implies capability for growth instead of being stubborn for fear that your previous inclination was wrong. I will tell you from first-hand experience, there have been days when grinding this category where I might play 10 plus hours without getting out of Los Santos. Or when I finally do get out of Los Santos, I'm settling for a time that's much slower than what I know I'm capable of. Being able to consistently see more of the game, more variety, yeah, of course, that's absolutely something that would be awesome. Another way of thinking about it, if some new strat came along that took the place of On Mission Zero Vigilante, it didn't alter the route but allowed for duping with a more consistent strat without any time loss, of course everyone would adopt the strat immediately, no question. Allowing the FPS cap also makes the frame perfect aspect of the trick much easier. Instead of releasing a key in a 33 millisecond window, the key could now be released in a window of 250 milliseconds, assuming the frame rate is set to 4. Human error would definitely be reduced as a significant factor, another huge step forward in making the run less reset heavy. But then again, is that really a pro? Well, it depends on who you ask. There isn't any real reason to remove this frame perfect trick or nerf it to make the inputs easier. If the goal is really just to remove the luck aspect and therefore make players rely solely on skill, the SCM edit would be a much better option, because it accomplishes this without any other real side effects. The only real counter argument I can see against this would be that this frame perfect trick isn't really in the spirit of the game. The game is mainly about driving well, shooting accurately, GTA things, right? Not frame perfect inputs. I don't think this is a valid argument. Just because this is a new or unique skill that was never required in the past doesn't mean that it shouldn't be used now. For example, a strategy was found to dupe Outrider, however it requires a replay to be played during a window of only a few frames, otherwise the game will just straight up crash. Were there any serious discussions of banning this strategy or modifying game files to prevent the crashes altogether? Of course not. To argue that just because something is a hard one-off trick that doesn't fit the skill of the rest of the run, it's completely irrelevant to whether it's a legitimate skill in the first place. Now that I've covered the basic overview of the proposed rule changes and the pros and cons of them, I think more insight can be gained from community discussion. This next part is going to be highly opinionated. As I show screenshots of posts from the Discord, I want to remind everyone that just because this is a debate, that doesn't mean you need to insult or otherwise be disrespectful to people just to push your point. Thriving says the rule change is going to happen either now, which is correct, or 5 years later once the record is simply unbeatable without it, which is incorrect. Not just incorrect, but plain stupid. I don't really understand the thought process here. A world record being extremely optimized, even to the point of being realistically unbeatable, doesn't seem like a problem to me that needs a solution, even if you add in the context of a ton of luck required to get close to world record paces. If someday a runner gets a sub 3 hour 20 minute time, for example, with current strats, yes, luck will be acknowledged as a significant factor that went into that speedrun. But I don't see that as being a problem. If the actual problem is just that the category will die because the world record is out of reach, I disagree entirely. Reset Speedrunning had a world record of 352 that seemed unbeatable by any player, just due to his otherworldly skill and the insane amount of time he spent playing. Nobody ever really came close to beating that 352 with the existing strats at the time, but there were still a ton of players having a good time just playing the game, even at the highest skill level. So what happens if you mod the SCM to fix call timers, and then a consistent but slightly slower way of LS duping is found, however unlikely that is? Either no one does the legit strat because the cheated one is faster, or you revert the rule to allow modded SCM, invalidating runs. We can go on and on about what if this and what if that for hours and hours, but at the end of the day, it really is impossible to future-proof rule implementations most of the time. This does bring up a good point though, definitely. There's a lot of angles to look at when considering making a rule change. And if anybody on the mod team takes one thing away from this video, I hope it's this. We should not rush this decision. Instead, we need to listen to the conversation, participate in the dialogue and ask questions, and really try to understand what is best for the majority. You can't please everyone, but you can try your best. Powdernet might be sarcastically calling for a category split here, but again, this suggestion has been brought up here and there since On Mission Zero Vigilante was first implemented. Category split is really not that far-fetched in my opinion. The proposed modifications are actually kind of comparable to using the On Mission Changer, a program which allows you to just change your On Mission variable with the press of a button. This ends up allowing you to do crazy dupes and strats that are basically impossible otherwise. There's an entire run category dedicated to using this tool. It's actually a super entertaining category and even competitive at the top level, despite not being a main category. Creating a new category out of a modified any % rule set on the extensions board, or really even the main board, is a legitimate talking point in my opinion. This seems a classic example of runners not liking running a category with RNG, and instead of dealing with it or not running it, they want to fix the game so it's how they like to play. Part of speedrunning is dealing with luck elements, and modifying the game so it's more fun is a terrible idea. You speedrun the game, you don't make a game to speedrun. If you don't like speedrunning the game, then don't. Too much RNG? Do something else. Too hard? Do something else. IMO. I personally agree with this line of thinking. There seems to be some weird sort of attachment by players to keep this category popular or make sure that obtaining world record is a real possibility, and I just don't agree with that. I don't see why this is the case. Would it really be such a bad thing for Any% to lose its long-standing title of main San Andreas category? Is it really worth it to go so far as to modify game files or allow external programs to cap the frame rate at will? I just can't really see that being the case. That phrase, you speedrun a game, you don't make a game to speedrun, that kind of just sums up the whole thing for me. Despite what my personal opinions are, as a moderator, it's only fair that I try to cast my vote for whatever option produces the outcome that most positively affects the community. With that said, as it stands, I really don't see any point in making any rule changes. Here's my opinion. If you truly think that Any% is unplayable, don't play it. Oh my god. Fuck it, I'm just shaving it off, dude.